Welcome to another episode of our Brew with an Agronomist series, and this time we're very fortunate, first-time guest, Rebecca-Jo Cellini. It's great to have you, Rebecca-Jo.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
It's great. Rebecca-Jo covers the area kind of around Georgian Bay here in the province of Ontario, and also with us, corn, soybean, wheat grower Chris Bell. Thanks for letting us crash your soybean field, Chris.
Not a problem. Anytime.
Well, it's great to be here because we've been following along with some Z-Series soybeans throughout our Brew with an Agronomist series to be able to kind of see this field, which we're very fortunate. It rained the last couple of days, so you weren't able to combine these on us, Chris.
Yeah.
It makes for a great scene. Maybe we can start there, Chris, in terms of just the growing season for you. What's the growing season been like up kind of around here, around the Cookstown area?
It's been pretty wet. Pretty wet for the whole thing.
Yeah.
Like last month or so, it's been nice and dry.
Yeah, well, it looks great now.
Yeah, it does.
When were these kind of planted approximately? Like, were these later than you'd usually do, or?
These ones were on time, so they're probably about 15th to 20th of May that we got them in. So.
And then they just really liked water after that,
Yes.
or you hoped they
hoped
liked
they
water.
did. Yes, exactly.
Now, these are Z-Series, which is new, obviously, for Pioneer. What leaned you into testing these? Because not a lot of growers, have started growing them at a scale that you have.
We like to try new things. I always like to stay on the cusp of new things and new technologies, and just really wanted to try them.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Rebecca-Jo, then, in terms of, we're kind of in this Cookstown area, and looks like a great field of soybeans. It was very easy to pick a spot in this field to film because every spot in the field looks exactly like this. Give me an idea in terms of what you've seen so far in not only here, but across your territory and plots and things like that with what Z-Series has done.
For sure. Yeah, so I cover a really wide territory. So starting off in the spring, there was areas that were very, very wet, other areas that were a little more fortunate and timely, but I would say the general theme was water everywhere. So I've had the chance to see the Z-Series in a bunch of field scales for seed production in some smaller plots and some larger plots, and they've looked really good all season. It's been a great year to test some of their strength in terms of white mold and other agronomics with the weather we've had. So.
Because really, for that territory you covered is so broad, not just in terms of geography, but like the variability of soil types, of heat units, of all of these types of things is pretty wide.
Yes.
The territory you do
Yeah.
cover.
So I would cover anything from a 00 soybean being the latest soybean they're growing, all the way to like the field we're in here, that's a 1.1 soybean. So huge maturity range. Range in crops too. A lot of corn, soybeans, wheat across the board, but some heavier livestock areas, some areas that fit IPs, edibles into it. So it's been awesome to see them and see how the Z-Series and the Enlist program fit into all those different geographies.
Then maybe not even specific to Z-Series, but in terms of, over the last couple of years, as you've seen growers kind of move to the Enlist system, what are those conversations like for you in terms of growers when maybe they're considering it, they haven't, bought in yet, or they did just buy in?
Yep.
What are those conversations like? What are their needs?
I think the biggest piece over the last couple of years with the Enlist system is the flexibility, and this year was a great year to showcase that. If you couldn't get in early, which we couldn't in a lot of areas, that pre-window got missed because it was wet. And when the field was fit, there was no time for a pre before we could get into plant. And the Enlist really allows us that option and the flexibility in season to take care of those weeds.
The Enlist system for you, Chris, is this your first year on the Enlist system?
we've been using Enlist for a while, but this is actually the first year we've actually sprayed with it.
Yeah.
But it worked really well. Kept the fields clean and knocked any weeds out. So.
Yeah. And did you need that flexibility? Like you said, it was wet. Did that come in pretty handy?
It did. It really did. So it just made things a lot easier to get things sprayed when you needed to spray them.
Mm-hmm. Well, because I think even our area, I'm quite a bit further south, but we ran into that challenge. By the time you could actually spray, it was so hot and humid that you were pretty restricted in what you could actually be able to do. I could see that system fitting well. Did you find that in some of the other cherries, especially further south?
Yes, definitely. And we had some pockets that were, the same problem. It was wet, gave us that flexibility to go in without the temperature restrictions. It's been a great piece. And as we start to struggle, my area has been fortunate. We're a little delayed from the south part of the province in terms of some of the weed pressure we've seen. We're fleabane in most areas now. Water hemp hasn't, it's creeping up, but hasn't shown up in a lot of areas. So it's a great option that we have now, sort of to be ahead of those problems now that we've learned from our southern friends.
Well, glad we can provide some lessons to everyone else. But it is one of those situations that, as obviously Pioneer moves to enlist only next year for 2025, you'll have had some grower days. You've been talking with a lot of growers, a lot of reps. How are those conversations going in terms of people recognizing that, that enlist system actually will be pretty beneficial, especially when you tie in, kind of the genetic capability of these Z series?
Yeah. I would say the conversations have gone well. We've a few years in now. We've learned every year more and more about the system. Great opportunity to use multiple modes of action in crop. If we compare it with a residual up front and have the enlist system as an option in crop if needed, is a really good fit. And again, helps with some of those weeds that are sneaking up on us and causing us trouble.
So, Chris, in terms of, you mentioned this year has obviously had some challenges in terms of, stop raining. Please stop raining.
Exactly.
Is that big challenge. What are some of the other challenges you as a grower do have, or that when you're making that selection, no matter what the variety is, that when you sit down, your reps, Michelle, or, whoever for any grower, what are some of those conversations like? What are some of the needs that you really want to see delivered?
For me, it's like, I don't want to go in the field too many times. Like, you start damaging the crops and everything. So for a chemical stance, it's like the minimum amount of passes that we can do and still get full control of all the weeds and everything. That's kind of the biggest thing for us. Also like the types of varieties. I like spreading it out for different heat units and everything for everything, so that way we can get things off in a timely manner without everything being ready all at once. Well, this year it might be everything ready all at once.
It does kind of, when it's all planted in 3 days, because that was the window.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Well, and I would think that would be a very similar thing for a lot of growers is, you obviously want the yield. And actually we do have here, I'll pull these here, because I do have a few plants in terms of like, you talk about yield potential on soybeans. We were counting these earlier, and there is, well, actually on this plant, like it's only 3 or 4 bean pods on that, if I look close at that. This one definitely averages 3. There's a couple of 2, but there's a lot of 4s in it too. So yield potential is obviously, wildly important, but there is that element of, I want to be able to get in there, spray when it's timely, but then really let the soybeans do their thing. I don't want to baby them all season long.
And I think the Z series, part of that is, as we've brought Z series out, there's minimum requirements it's got to meet for white mold, SDS, all kinds of agronomic traits, which helps us with that. With soybeans, we talk about your yield potential is 100% when it's in the bag, and it only goes down from there, unfortunately. So what can we do to mitigate that, without even having to go in the field with a fungicide or, weed control, any of that kind of thing. So.
And then obviously, you mentioned it too with that weed control element in this part of the province where more of those challenges that some of the growers in Essex, Kent, in our area, kind of, Middlesex, Lambton have been feeling for a couple of years. You've got some new challenges too in terms of that weed pressure, white mold becoming a bigger issue. How do growers manage that as it does become a bigger issue for them?
Yeah, it's been a mindset shift in a lot of the area I would cover. We have gotten away with minimal weed control and, minimal modes of action. So unfortunately, there's a lot of learning from experience, but I think the more, we can bring those conversations forward. Like I said, we've learned from our friends in the South, and as Pioneer, we've got access to so many resources that we're able to kind of start those conversations early and hopefully get ahead of things.
Because what do you see, Chris, in terms of some of those challenges from whether it's weed pressure, whether it's disease? Like what are some of the ones that have kind of creeped in over the last few years that you've had to face?
Most of it's weed pressure.
Yeah.
Just with fleabane coming around and just a few others, it's just like trying to keep them under control so they don't take over.
Yeah. Well, it is one that you talk about lessons learned. I remember the year I also learned a very hard lesson. And all of a sudden it does shift with what you need to do.
Yeah.
It is unfortunate, but it also is, part of it I do remember is that other people had faced it, and we didn't face it until we needed to, but after 1 year, we knew how to face it because we learned from others.
Yeah. SCN would be another big one for the geography I cover that's kind of crept in. This would be the sort of most southern part of my area, probably here along with the west side of my area face it the most, but then there's pockets everywhere. And so one nice thing about the Z series is we're looking to bring everything out across the board with SCN. A couple of the earlier ones, still working on them, but that's a nice, just no thought needed. They're all going to be SCN and not have to find out the hard way that you have SCN.
Well, that and then even things like whether it's white mold resistant. Like, do you face white mold, Chris?
Yeah, last year we had 3 fields that were I would say 50% of them were white mold.
Really?
But we lucked out that we got the lots of rain and they grew well, so the yield wasn't totally in the basement. But
yeah. But also is that tough one in terms of, oh yes, this can be a problem.
Yes,
we
exactly.
have to manage this regularly, and being able to look through that seed guide and say, okay, what's got a bit of resistance to that helps a lot. So
it does.
Well, you know what? It really is incredible to kind of look over a field like this and say, for me as a grower too, that's trying to, starting to figure out, okay, what kind of varieties are we looking for, for soybeans? I really do have to say that it gives me a lot of great excitement to be able to sit down with my seed rep and say, you know what, I really want to look these up because, gosh, I was up north and talking to Chris, and we were in a field, and if I could have a field of soybeans like this, I would be thrilled. So actually, what I would love to do, we've got a great spot of beans here, but I can see it continues on.
Yep.
Can we go for a quick look and see what these beans look like?
Yeah, let's do it.
So, Chris, I'm curious, when you, in terms of beans like this, how does this compare to other beans that you grow? Like, do you like tall beans? Do you like short, poddy beans? Like, what are you looking for?
I like tall beans.
Yeah.
I like nice tall because we plant 20-inch rows, so we want nice canopy over everything to keep the weed pressure down, and it helps. So
obviously something that kind of leafs over quick, branches out fast too. How did these branch out?
pretty quick, actually.
Did they? Yeah. Well, and you can see they are a nice tall bean, and you've got a pile of pods all the way up, it's even right from bottom to top.
Yep.
That kind of right along the lines of what you're looking for all the time.
Yeah, for sure.
And what about for other growers? What are growers looking for from a bean plant? Because I know it does vary. I'm kind of with Chris. I like that tall, branchy bean.
Yep. And I would say, we see more and more beans on 15, 20, 30-inch rows even. So that canopy closure is a big piece of it. Everybody wants it perfect. You want it tall and canopy, but not too tall. And
you don't want lodging.
Yeah.
You need it to be perfect all the way across.
Canopy closure, close that canopy, less likely to have to come in for weed control, those kind of things would be a big one. And, beans all the way to the top. There's lots of top pods here. I like to call them the Hawaii beans because I'd like to go on a trip to Hawaii. So that's always nice to see. Yeah,
right at the top.
Yeah. So
well, and in terms of 20-inch rows, you've been growing 20-inch rows for a long time, Chris.
It's probably close to 20 years now.
Is it now? Yeah, and you've always had great success because that is one. For us, it's 15 or 30 because everybody kind of does it that way.
Yeah,
20 is kind of that nice middle ground.
It is. Yeah. And it's worked well for us. And then we put tram lines in it so we have less damage whenever we're spraying, so it works really good.
Yeah. Yep. And then in terms of you look at a field like this, I would be optimistic myself with yield potential on this. How's it compare to the rest of your beans?
They're all actually pretty good.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's amazing how even though the spring they had, how that yield potential has really come out.
Yes, it has.
Despite it being, we talked about this, I think, off camera in terms of maybe even in that episode, was very much in terms of like the yield potential is 100 when we start, and everything along the way is trying to kill it. And that's what, when you talk to the soybean breeding team, that's a big thing of what they're saying. They realize that. How can we try to, lessen at least that risk of SEN, white mold, weed pressure, too wet, too dry, all of that stuff. And it really is incredible that, if we had a year like this, you talk about 20 years ago, would you be thinking you were having 50 plus bushel beans, Chris?
Nope, definitely not.
Like just the ability for them to be able to hold that yield potential in anything is pretty incredible.
It is. It really is. So.
Yeah. Well, Rebecca-Jo, Chris, I really appreciate the chance to be able to kind of walk this bean field, see what the potential can be, and hopefully give a whole bunch of growers as well as sales reps, across the area that, this is, you said you grow 100 plus acres of Z series.
Yep.
They all look great.
It
gives pretty good confidence for what the future of soybean genetics at Pioneer is. So, Rebecca-Jo, Chris, thanks for joining.
No problem. Anytime.
Thank you.
Thanks.